go ahead and introduce our panelists. To my left, we have David Foreman, who is a serial entrepreneur and algorithmic trader, and as well, he is the co-founder of SpaceBridge, a space logistics company working on anything from clearing space debris as well as improving logistics and supply chains. And he is also the, one second, I apologize. He's the CEO of Cascade Trading Systems, but more recently has co-founded the SpaceBridge program. And as well, to his left, we have Jeremy Goldstein from Blockchain for Sustainable Development. Blockchain for Sustainable Development is a 501c3 nonprofit that is working towards the UN Sustainable Goal Development attainment and making that process better using distributed ledger technology and blockchain. Yes, and to his left, we have Kylan McClintock, who is as well the co-founder of the Blockchain for Sustainable Development. He is also the lead of Proof of Impact over at Flux IoT, which is a distributed network for environmental and agricultural data aggregation and utilization. Guys, just as when my mom's friends or neighbors ask what the heck Jackson is up to with blockchain, doesn't seem like she can ever describe it properly or accurately. There's always leaves some holes. So I'll pass it over to you guys, and if you want to give a quick overview of yourself or fill in anything I missed or why you're so excited about blockchain and the new technology. Let me start with you, David.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, blockchain, I like to compare it to the internet in the early 1990s because there's so much that can be done with the technology, but there's so little that is built yet. And so really looking at all the different possibilities and opening your mind to what can be is almost more important than looking at what actually exists right now. And I think I want to lead with that as we're at sort of the future, the point where the future is the limit. And there's so much that can happen that we'll just need to get there ourselves.
I would say that the only thing I would add is that if Jackson's mom is anything like my dad, who this week called it, "Oh, you're going to go speak about Bitcoin and Block Square, right?" So I don't think he understood how bad the Bitcoin one was. But anyways, if they're anything like that, I think he's right. Don't let your mom's friends explain this, what you do to their friends. Do it yourself. Blockchain for Sustainable Development's focus is on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, which are a standardized methodological guidance document, agenda document that we can all use, businesses, organizations, governments, agencies, to align our impact. So when we talk about social impact and environmental impact, those are very vague general concepts. We're providing access to financial services for people in the developing world. Great, but 9.3, the SDG 9.3, that target actually says one of the goals we have as a globe, both governments, institutions, individual companies, is to help provide infrastructure that will allow for access for people that did not previously have financial services to have access to those. So this is a way for us to all say, we can talk about it in the same way. And I think when it comes to social impact and environmental impact, that's the most important part I hope that we can get out of a conversation today about it. And what I try to express at every speaking engagement I have is that we should all be having the same conversation and all be talking the same language when it comes to impact in order to help align and standardize our missions all together, whether it's private enterprises, whether it's MetalPay or Consensus or a project that's putting together, SpaceBridge is putting together a specific use case. I think regardless of that, you want to make sure that we're all having the same conversation so that the people we're trying to help, vulnerable populations and folks in the developing world and small business owners and smallholder land farmers, don't get lost in our high-level talk and in our visions and dreams for what we can do for them, and make sure that through the United Nations and through the SDGs, we're having the same conversation so they don't get left behind.
So my favorite explanation for blockchain to new people in it is actually, right now, it's basically a slow database for people that don't trust each other. But that trust component can't be overstated. Really, trust is how humans can collaborate. Through history, we've just trusted the people around us. It's made us very tribalistic in nature. With blockchain, though, it takes this to a new level. If you don't have to know someone or rely on their reputation between a middleman to broker that trust between two organizations or people, that opens up a new world of opportunity of collaboration, especially between different nations. And that's why working on the international level is so important. It opens up, say, the use case of SpaceBridge, where a US satellite company can now trust a Chinese space tow truck to refuel it and not take it out of the out of the sky. It enables corporations and governments to work together to actually solve these grand challenges that we face right now, such as climate change, which cannot be solved just on a local level. So that's really what brings me so much interest to the blockchain, is this new layer of collaboration that's now possible.
And I want to, I guess, add one more thing. So a blockchain currently is mainly being used as a cryptocurrency, so a way of exchanging value between two people. But I think we shouldn't get locked down into this mindset. There's so many different ways you can integrate a blockchain into a business model that helps businesses trust each other, helps individuals trust each other, and maybe even makes individuals trust businesses more in terms of their operations, and governments as well. Just because the past has been this cryptocurrency doesn't mean it's necessarily the future, and that's where we start to get some really exciting use cases.
Awesome. I think that's a great point, David. Kind of branching away and distancing from the cryptocurrency application, but that kind of got me thinking. Beyond just the cryptocurrency application or kind of a trusted peer-to-peer network, and maybe from more of a philosophical standpoint, what niches or problems do you guys see blockchain fulfilling currently, and then maybe how will that evolve into a future ecosystem?
I think that David said something that kind of leads me to exactly a good answer for that question is. And it's taking it a step back a little bit from your question particularly, but it would say, do you need the blockchain, is a series of questions that you ask yourself, and we've all seen on LinkedIn and Facebook and our other social media sites, those cute charts that people will make, and it's a series of arrows or a series of squares, and it says, ask yourself this question, no, you don't need a blockchain. Yes, go to the next square. Ask yourself that question, yes, no, go to the next square. There should be one of those for a cryptocurrency. You've decided you're using a blockchain. Great. Does it need to be permissioned or permissionless? Who's using it? What type of system does it need to be? Do you need to allow individual users who you don't know and don't trust into the system to buy and sell services on it? Or is this an internal mechanism for tracking your own company's actions, your own company's measurement, maybe financial flows and transfer value between your company that doesn't necessarily need to have a cryptocurrency in every single case? And maybe the financial transfer flow, I would look to you and say maybe that is a good example. But other than that, there's often enough times you could use a permissioned ledger and not have a cryptocurrency added. Sorry, it's the second time I came at MetalPay. I love his company, so that's why I'm going to reference that.
He's just repping it though. We're laughing because he doesn't work there.
So now I feel really bad. Now everyone, my fault. So I think that's a good answer to that question, is start with the question of do you need a blockchain? Then start with the question of do you need a cryptocurrency? Once you made that decision, based on those features, which I think Kylan would be more appropriate to speak to those answers, but there are these fundamental characteristics of what blockchain can do. There's the decentralized and distributed nature. There's the fact that it's immutable and resilient. There's the fact that it's anti-fragile. There are a number of other characteristics that create this trustless ecosystem. But just because you need that trustless ecosystem doesn't mean you need a coin on top of it. And so that would be, I think, a good starting point for an answer to that question, but not comprehensive in any way. And I think Kylan's more suited to answer some of those technical questions.
Yeah, so as David was saying, comparing blockchain right now to the internet in the 90s, no one could have predicted where we are today with how the internet has completely changed not just how we consume information and communicate, but it actually has changed us as a culture, even as like individuals, as species. We trust that information is available at all times, but it's also, there's the negative side of things where actually news that you're getting is impacting the real world at an either negative or a positive level of whatever your disposition is, but we can't necessarily trust all of that. So what if you take blockchain now and try and envision the future 20 years from now, how will humanity change based on being able to trust each other, based on transparency in our interactions. And then there's also the potential negatives where if you have your reputation that is immutable and is tied to a blockchain, there's complications with that. And I always look at it to, like, there's a couple forces that are always driving the change of technology and humanity. One of them is efficiency. It's just always going to win out in a capitalistic society. Efficiency, and what does that lead to? So you can start drawing these conclusions of what a future of blockchain will look like. Just take the prison systems, for instance. It's highly inefficient to put someone away for 20 years and pay to guard them, to feed them, to house them, and it's not very efficient at all. So a blockchain tied to a reputation, we're already seeing it kind of in China, where a social credit score, there's these components that are just, if you have your digital identity tied to a blockchain and your reputation, what does that lead to? And that's, I think just in a greater scheme, we're looking at blockchain as cryptocurrencies primarily right now, but we should really look at the core fundamentals of how humanity evolves over time and seeing other technologies change humanity. How is this transparent, immutable, decentralized, trustless technology going to change us? And how can it change us for the better? How can we get on top of that? How can we start talking about how to actually design these systems ahead of time rather than having them just kind of come up on us and in this domino-like way? How do we actually design them to be anti-fragile from the beginning?
Does everyone know what that means, by the way? Because we all definitely know, like, resilient, we all know what immutable, we all know transparent, we all know encrypted. Anti-fragile is a concept that says because a blockchain is resilient. So a blockchain is resilient, 80% of the nodes go off, there's an EMP over the Eastern Hemisphere. As long as there's a server here, that blockchain can be redistributed. The data will still be held and stored, and when that network comes back up, that's the resilience. But anti-fragile means in a situation where every other system is collapsing, they are not interconnected in a way. I don't know, you guys are all undergrad, right? So maybe you don't remember this, but in 2007, that one issue with the Bear Stearns and the mortgage collapse, right, and Lehman Brothers, that led to a catastrophic collapse across the system. That's what we mean by anti-fragile. Bitcoin and other digital currencies, whether they're independent of each other, obviously side chains on Ethereum are going to be relying on what happens in the Ethereum chain. But outside of that, GoChain isn't going to be responsible for what happens on a Bitcoin blockchain. And so for that reason, when we talk about anti-fragile, we're talking about every other system collapses. The resilience of a blockchain will allow it to remain steady in the face of that chaos, and then the anti-fragility is, oh, our systems are collapsing and that one's not. Let's go there. That's the anti-fragile nature. So Kylan and I both mentioned, I want to make sure it was out there.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, Jeremy, thank you for the clarification.
Sorry.
No, that's perfect. And as well, you guys had mentioned kind of complications stemming from cryptocurrencies, or Kylan, you mentioned it being kind of a slow database. Do you guys see any way right now or forward thinking into the future how we can kind of design these solutions, be it through one specific blockchain or interoperability, to kind of increase efficiency and get rid of a lot of these kind of bad stigmas or bad technological implications that are going on right now to further improve the space? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of really interesting projects that are all trying to solve that problem right now, particularly in the token space, looking at speed of transaction, decentralization, governance. There's almost this like hodgepodge of different experiments going on, and we'll just get to find out which one is going to be victorious.
Solana, perhaps?
Solana, yeah.
Hey.
It seems, though, that each of these sort of optimize for different parameters. So, for example, Ethereum is built for decentralization and having a really strong governance structure. However, it is not really built for speed, and this is something we've been seeing in the past half year, is all these different projects are building on Ethereum, but as a result, now the network's getting slower and slower, and it's starting to look like, wow, is this going to be able to scale into the future? And of course, there are a bunch of different solutions for Ethereum coming out, like Raiden, these sidechain capabilities of basically being able to transact more transactions through the Ethereum network. However, it's not going to be like some of the other projects out there, like EOS, where it's slightly more centralized. They have maybe less nodes. You can't just run a node, or anyone can't just run a node. However, it's going to be able to, as a result, take in more transactions and more ability to process. And I guess, especially for a payment system, you want that ability to have the Visa number of transactions going through the network. So it's going to be interesting to see, I guess, what ends up being optimized for in the future and what people adopt.
And I think when it comes to impact projects that have either a specific social or environmental impact, or working from kind of like a project-driven perspective, here's a problem, we want to solve it, we're going to figure out how to help have IoT, emerging technologies, blockchain solve that problem. Which chain to choose is kind of a big, right? I have a number of projects that are coming and they're going, we have an API, we have an app, we have all the sensors, everything is ready. Give us advice on who to build on. And my answer is usually like, that's a complicated question. I think for what we're seeing, most of the characteristics that we're looking at with those types of projects are things within the smart contract language and within the dynamicness of, no, not dynamicness, of how that smart contraction system will work. Because most of these projects are going to have extremely complex and complicated data sets to deal with, and are also going to have very unique problems to deal with. Not every village's issue is going to be the issue of the next village, but you're trying to create a system that would solve a problem for all of them. So in that context, for us, speed matters, but not as much. Immutability obviously matters. And access for everybody, so that way, this is a system and each villager is going to join. It needs to be a permissionless system, it needs to be a distributed system, it needs a centralized system. But does the data need to be stored decentralized? Not necessarily in that context. What matters more in that context is how accessible and adaptable the smart contract platform is. So when I'm looking at folks who are building those types of projects, for instance, the conversation I had with Solana earlier, it's like, cool, tons of transactions, but we had a conversation about small data, right? So if we're talking about small amounts of data being stored on each transaction, that we have to start to think about, is that something that is adaptable to a system where someone's data, farming data, is not going to be able to be broken up. You can't just take the end number. Well, here's how much water we used, and here's how many pounds of crops we got. There's a lot more that matters there. So even if you have your AI, your ML, whatever it's going to be, managing those data sets internally, when you send it back to the chain, you want all that to still be there, and you want all that to be stored, and you want to have a system that someone can go code in Java or Solidity, I don't care what the language is, but code something that is customizable for each sub-project within that. So this is an agricultural project. Each farm will be able to customize what data sets they want to store, what information they want to track, what sensors they have in their fields. I have humidity sensors. I got soil moisture. Great. We need to be able to customize what we're storing based on what sensors we have and what IoT we're using. So that, I think, is the most important part for the projects that I work with. But the greater crypto community, particularly those who are dealing with financial services issues, they're dealing with a whole other side of things. They don't care how smart that contract is. It needs to be fast, and it needs to be faster than MasterCard.
I would add one more point on that, is that we're designing all these different blockchains, and most of them have different kind of governance structures. And actually, that really affects, we're really not sure how it'll all play out with the governance and the accumulation of power versus decentralization, which is really what drew me to a lot of these this new way of organizing people. But like EOS, right now it has 21 working block producers. Well, those 21 working block producers have a lot of control over the governance, and they also have every incentive to stay in power and vote for the people that are already in power. So I would just, I would like to see these different governance structures play out and actually see which ones can continue this decentralization of power rather than the current structures which we have right now. Blockchain is this incredible technology to disaggregate the power structures that have just naturally accrued in our society. Power begets power. Once you're in power, it's easy to lobby for more power to influence other people, even in a democratic system, to stay in power. So I think that's one of my core driving reasons why I'm in here and trying to influence the future of blockchain systems is I would like to see systems where it's a meritocracy of ideas. So the best ideas rise to the top, independent of whether they're already controlling of power. And I think that'll become exponentially more important as our tools to create value in the world become more powerful with AI and quantum computers and nanotechnology, whatever the future technologies are. It's going to be just capital will accumulate more capital at an exponential rate. So for us all to be happy and create a world that is beneficial for us all to live in, I think it's important that that value can accrue in a more justified, meritocratic way.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Kylan. And Jeremy, you had mentioned that within these platforms and potential interoperability, they need to be customized village by village per se, so that each specific actor can use it for their whatever context they need. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the number one UN goal for sustainable development is to bring people out of poverty, correct?
Not number one in a priority. There's 17 equal goals, but yes, the first goal, SDG 1, is to end poverty. And in that we mean, first, there's actually a couple of targets under no poverty. I think we can really think about it in two different ways. One is to eradicate extreme poverty, those individuals living under the global poverty level, which today is $1.25 a day. Folks that are living under that level, our goal by 2030 is to eradicate. There should be nobody living below that line, and it's not going to stay at $1.25. I mean, by 2030, it'll be $1.35 or $1.50 or whatever that global poverty line is.
Maybe $15.
Let's hope it's not $15 a day. Gosh, I'd be poor. But no, I think that in that way, we're trying to eradicate extreme poverty, and then we're trying to have those who are living in non-extreme but poverty in general, right? So that would be something like probably $4 a day, although it's not measured in the same way. But yes.
Poverty is that kind of like indicator of indicators for the other SDGs, though.
To an extent, yeah.
Because if you can get yourself out of poverty, then you have money to spend on education and food, so ending hunger, on healthcare, sanitation,
sure.
Access to
And when it comes to the SDGs, they're all interlinked. Kylan's right about that. That it's not only poverty that matters in every other. There are so many interlinkages between the SDGs, which may be a little deep to start on the SDG stuff. I would start with like figuring out which ones you really attach to and where your projects will work and what goals you're trying to accomplish. But there are tons of interlinkages between all of them.
Awesome.
But yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, not at all, not at all. I guess that's kind of a good segue into one of my later questions was Jeremy and Kylan as well. What if not poverty, something else? What's one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals are you most ambitious about, or do you think blockchain could have the greatest impact on?
Yeah, just to make sure, I don't want to start, and we all have passions in this area, so we're going to get deep with you right now, but I want to make sure we don't do it too quickly and too much, too fast. Who's familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals in general? And how many technologists in the room, or coders, or devs, or people who understand technology? Okay. So based on that response. So, okay, so 30-second overview of the SDGs. In 2000, the international community came together and agreed on a set of Millennium Development Goals. These were 7 goals, very similar, highfalutin goals, big dreams, right? With a couple of targets under each. Between 2000 and 2015, we accidentally walked backwards into achieving one goal, and that was to have poverty between 2000 and 2015. If you take India and China out of the mix, we made 0 progress on it. So India and China walked us backward through their own development into having the numbers that would meet half of the world half of those in poverty came out of poverty, but really only because of the economic development of those two very populous nations. In 2015, the international community came back together and said, I think we screwed up. We didn't include the developing world in drafting these. We didn't include the developing world in our targets. We didn't include a good indicator set. Like everyone here loves data, even the technologists, we all know about data and why it matters in the IoT revolution. In that regard, we now have said, okay, let's not just say let's have poverty. Let's not go with these indicators that are easy. The WHO monitors how many people have HIV or tuberculosis or malaria, but let's get a little deeper than that. And that's what the SDGs did. And we went to the remainder of the developing world, including organizations and stakeholders from every country in the world, and said, help us develop a more comprehensive policy set. That's what the SDGs are. That's what the Sustainable Development Goals are. First, they are not binding on any nation. Every nation is obliged to create a national action plan to engage those SDGs. And every country in the world, unlike Paris 21, every country in the world, including the United States, is still signed to the non-binding Declaration on Sustainable Development. Now, countries that don't want to do anything about it can still sign to it and have no obligation, so maybe that's why every country is still a part of it, but most countries are building their national action plans to engage these 17 goals. Under each of the goals is a set of targets. So when we talked earlier about no poverty. Okay, great, that's not specific enough, so let's get specific. Eradicate extreme poverty and have regular poverty, and then 4 or 5 others. And under each of those are indicators. Well, what does that mean? Right, so the $1.25 a day methodology, that standard came from the Global Poverty Index, the GPI, but we've also incorporated it into the indicator framework. So when we are measuring, no poverty, great. Eradicate extreme poverty. What's extreme poverty mean? Define that noun, make it a proper noun. Well, extreme poverty is the Global Poverty Index of $1.25 a day. Then we go measure it, we can bring the data back and say whether we've accomplished that or not. So that's the high level of what the SDGs are. It's a policy addenda, it's non-binding, but it is comprehensive.
So I've kind of taken that quantifiable nature of the SDG indicators and incorporated them into a system of kind of, you can consider them like KPIs for the global worlds and positive impact, and work this into a system called proof of impact. So it's kind of a play on words like proof of work, proof of stake, but actually the bigger goal is to actually create currency rather than valued on a gold backing, fiat, or the work your computer is doing, actually on the value of the impact you're creating to the world. And that's our main charge with Flux. Flux is, so our main SDGs that we're working towards are ending hunger, because we work with a lot of farmers.
Number 2.
That's number 2, right? Climate change is number 13. Life on land and life on underwater, which are deep to my heart, because deforestation, climate change, it just affects literally everything. So using proof of impact, you need a system of oracles to verify the impact that's being created. And that's blockchain. Just to step back, blockchain, the value is immutable, the data is immutable once it's sent to the blockchain, but that's valueless unless you can verify that the data coming onto the chain is accurate. So we're going to see a lot of projects, and this is one of the things that we're really passionate about supporting at B4SD, supporting projects that can actually act as those oracles of impact. So a network of environmental sensors all over the world that can interoperate in a global data co-op type system and actually act as an oracle on whether a local village is deforesting the population, or the acidity in the ocean is rising. So, or if you're sequestering carbon in the soil in your grow operation. And then you can start to incentivize for those behaviors. Because after all, I think humanity is kind of this, we're still like in our baby-like brains. We can completely change our behavior based on our environment and the incentive structures we're exposed to. So to create a world that incentivizes for these positive outcomes for the global good, not just for humanity, but for the entire planet and the natural ecosystems, we need to design these incentive structures around that, and that's what proof of impact is all about. You can actually earn value from the impact you're creating.
Yeah, and I think the SDG that I'm most passionate about is creating an equal opportunity for all countries and all the people in those countries. So particularly with SpaceBridge, we're going to be helping grow the ecosystem in Earth's orbit. helping manage satellites, deorbiting satellites that are dead, so we don't have essentially dead cars sitting in the middle of the traffic lanes in outer space. And as a result of that, what can happen is we can grow the number of satellites in low Earth orbit so that we can basically supply the entire world with internet access. So a child in rural Africa could create an account and be able to access, say, the Khan Academy and have a channel into that learning that would potentially impact that community extremely heavily in terms of just the way that they think about the world and the skills and the tools available to them. Additionally, there's only a handful of countries right now with space capabilities, and it's going to become harder in the future for emerging countries to develop those capabilities and really become a player at the global field. So what we're going to do there is try to create a structure where new countries, new companies are able to interface and be welcomed into the space environment versus what would happen much more naturally if one or two of these countries was in control, which is they would try to keep control and not let any of these emergent players come into the ecosystem. So trying to create a fair playing field from an opportunity standpoint, I think is critical for the future of our world.
And I recognize I didn't answer your question before, so I will make my best
If you have a
attempt.
response, Jeremy, please.
During law school, I studied child labor, and my goal is to eradicate child labor. So for me, that's a goal under 8, ending forced labor, ending debt bondage, ending child labor. But I think because of the interlinkages, it's hard to say, what's your favorite and where do you think projects are going? Because there are projects under every single goal right now that you could go, ooh, they are really doing good things. Plastic Bank is having people, giving people tokens, Plastic Bank tokens, for bringing in their recycled plastic. Right now the project is big in, I believe it's Ghana and Senegal, and they're expanding now as well. There are projects under SDG 14 and SDG 2 and SDG 6, which is about clean water and water use efficiency. Watercoin is a Bank X protocol that is out in Uganda or Malawi, one of the two. I know they're far away from each other. I feel bad mixing those two up. But they're either in Uganda or Malawi. But they're essentially creating a data set where they're providing tokens to folks to use a water provision service through that Watercoin is providing. So that way they can track and monitor water use for households. So not the way that we would for our sprinkler systems, that doesn't exist there, but what they do is use it for washing and drinking and cooking, but it's not accessible to their home. There's a station within their village that provides that. So they went ahead and put this data management, this flow management system on the water access there in the village, and are now providing tokens as part of their test case, provide tokens to individuals to use in their system. So obviously it's a little bit of a grant. You don't have to pay for your water this month. Play with our tech and let's see if it works. But they're going to be able to monitor water use efficiency and then be able to monetize that. So you're using less water than your neighbor. That's not just a benefit because you then spend, the way we would think about it is, well, I just spend less, I spend $80 a month on water in my house and my neighbor spends 90. So I save $10 a month compared to that person. Let's monetize that, right? Let's monetize that use and then take that example to every other possible place where you could save a little. You could do a little less tilling in your fields to save a little carbon. You can do a little less driving to save a little gas. Let's monetize that for you in a way that puts that on a chain. Maybe you're not getting paid back for it, but you're being incentivized to use less. That's sustainable for sure. And then I want to point out your favorite SDG. You don't even know yet. No, first of all, you guys should all have a passion, and whatever your passion is go think about projects and brainstorm projects that are in that space. But it all goes back to 9.3. Everything we're doing here goes back because of cryptocurrency, because of access to financial services. Everything goes back to 9.3. So if you had to have that conversation with Jackson's mom's friends, start at 9.3, because that's the one they'll actually understand. There's no bank for you because you have a cell phone and you maybe have access to Wi-Fi occasionally when you head into town, when you head to the supermarket or the coffee shop, but there's still no bank in that town. You now have access to financial services that you didn't before. And when we're talking about the developing world, particularly in South and Central Asia, and particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, the ability and ability, for lack of a better term, eliminating the concepts of corruption in those regions, the ability of the governments to provide that infrastructure to people in the rural areas is not there. So when we're talking about the rural-urban divide, which does bridge across all of the SDGs, rural-urban divide applied to 9.3 is maybe the easiest way to think about what this technology does for people. And then let them get that part first. If you're talking to a non-technologist, someone who didn't raise their hand for either SDGs or technology, that's how you explain it to them. Is start at 9.3, talk about financial services.
So remittances, especially.
Not just remittances, access to banking too, but remittances
banking
as well.
the unbanked, unbanking the banked as well, removing the middleman.
Ew. Take my money.
I would say one other thing. I think the next big impact thing that consumers will see outside of remittances, getting rid of the Western Unions of the world. Actually, the Western Unions joined with Techstars to create a fintech accelerator because they know their time is coming, that they can't charge $20 per transaction to the poorest people in the world sending money over. The other one, which kind of goes to your child labor, how does blockchain affect child labor rates? Well, it's about transparency and supply chains. I probably see 2 new supply chain blockchain projects every day through my work at Flux. And this is going to come to consumers. It's going to be an expectation that consumers will have to adopt to, that if you can't scan the product you're buying, then it probably didn't come from a source that you can trust. I don't know if many of you know this, but we've got dozens of different free-range certifications for eggs or grass-fed for beef. And most of them are complete BS because there is not really a great standard. But if you could track that all the way back to the blockchain using an Oracle, like a camera showing how many chickens there are per square feet, and then track that through the 8 different steps along the supply chain, and then the consumer, all they have to see is that it is free range with 3.7 square feet per chicken, that this cow sequestered this amount of carbon, that only ate grass, that it was this old when it was collected. That should be the expectation, and we need to drive that adoption, because otherwise, if consumers aren't expecting this, then it's not going to make the impact that it can.
And then getting philosophical on that, I think that takes us back to the decentralization of trust, right? That is the fundamental characteristic there, is right now, you trust Whole Foods, or the brand on the top of the package at the Whole Foods, or for me, Sprouts, because it's really far from my house. But I trust Sprouts, and I trust that the products they're putting there, and the alfresco eggs, you guys have seen the new eggs, they're like $8 a carton, right? And they call them, they're not free range, they're pasture raised. They're like $8 a pop, but I trust them because they've been certified, because they tell the story, but why does it have to be that I trust a company, right? So that's trust 3.0, so going all the way, I trust 1.0, 2,000 years ago. I trust the guy across the hall, because when I had to go chase my goats down the hill, he watched over my kid. When I got back, my kid was still okay. So I trust the guy across in the hut across from me. And then invaders came to my village, and they tried to kill us all, and a government showed up with the military and protected us from getting killed. Trust 2.0. I trust the government. Then a company comes, and they give me products, and it's Patagonia, and they show all their factories that they're clean, so I buy a Patagonia, not this one, but normally, I buy a Patagonia shirt because I know the people who made it have health care. But I had to still trust Patagonia for that. Mm-hmm. And why do I trust Patagonia? Because they're the hippie hiking company. Of course they're not lying to me. How do I really know that? How do I actually know that? In Kylan's example, now I know that. In your example with SpaceBridge, give us a bunch of money, we're cleaning up space, and you're really interested in clean space and clean up, prove it. So your data is going to show that, right? So I like that as this trust 4.0 element, like Kylan expressed, removing the trust in the corporation, whether it's Whole Foods or alfresco eggs or Silk almond milk.
Yeah. Especially when there's a monetary incentive to do so, like organic products are that much more expensive because that's what the people are paying for. They want that impact on their environment. But from a company standpoint, it's like, oh, we can make 50% more money by saying it's organic. So the incentive structure is not aligned, and that's why trustless systems are so powerful in terms of verifying this information.
And just one quick point, a big component of that is that Patagonia, that only works because you know the Patagonia brand, and that's cost tens of millions of dollars over decades to create that trust. Or to get an organic certification, you have to have X amount of revenue and profit to be able to afford having someone come over to your farm twice a year to certify that. If you could actually just have a system of sensors that act as an oracle rather than this big certification agency, or the value of the brand, which makes it really hard to break into these value-added premium products, then that opens up the road for smallholder farmers to join into these like producer type co-ops and to actually sell at the value-added premiums. So that's a decentralization of that force, and we can actually see a much larger percentage of the value that you're paying for fair trade coffee going back to the original producer, because you don't have the middleman and it costs far less to be able to get that certified.
Awesome. All right. Well, that kind of clears up in my mind something I was wondering what kind of solutions we can utilize to kind of solve these problems. But I was wondering if you guys would want to extrapolate a little more on, like David, what you're doing with SpaceBridge Logistics, and as well the B4SD and proof of impact with Flux.
Yeah, perfect. So SpaceBridge is this, it's basically a platform for space companies. So we're working with over a dozen different companies right now, trying to create a universal standard for interacting in space particularly. So to get a little more specific, we have around 5 different space tow truck companies, and their model is actually to go up, grab satellites in orbit, and then deorbit the satellites, which is a huge industry right now because of the exponential growth of the satellite industry, because of the cheaper launch costs and all that good stuff happening. And the question becomes, how do you get all these different companies to trust each other? There's United States companies, and also, given that Space Force has recently been announced, I think that trust component between countries is so crucial for humanity as a collective to grow our presence in orbit. And so it's like, how do you get these US companies to trust Chinese companies when they demonstrated they can blow stuff up in space and all this stuff? And the answer really lies in the blockchain. It's how can we get the truthful information put into the system and have this ongoing record of all those different interactions, and create a reputation score and build trust that way, in terms of you don't even have to speak the same language, but you can enter into a smart contract agreement with another company and then automatically create a circumstance where you get paid out. I guess smart contracts, for those of you who don't know, are an incredible new addition to the thanks to the blockchain space. Because blockchain is basically programmable money, you can create a contract that's very like a legal contract, except it's very real and verifiable. And you create an escrow wallet, and then create a circumstance. So, like with a space company, it's like, okay, I'm going to deorbit this satellite, and so the two companies create a smart contract together, and then we have a third-party oracle that's looking at the system and objectively just asking the question, did they deorbit the satellite like they said they would, or did they not? And through that construct, you're able to eliminate a lot of this business-to-business friction, where currently, if you want to do business in space, you need 6 months of negotiation time and practically an army of lawyers to make sure every single circumstance is covered. Because without that, there's just too big of a risk with these multi-million-dollar assets that are way up in space, way far away from where you can physically see them and touch them and verify that anything has happened to them, which creates this weird obfuscation layer where instead of like if we're doing commerce and I'm selling Jeremy a cow, I can physically give him the cow. There's just no way of actually verifying that with space objects. And so really what SpaceBridge's question is how do we create a protocol for all these different companies to interact and do so in a frictionless way, or eliminate that business-to-business friction, so humanity can grow our presence in orbit as well as possible.
If Dave's company proves that the space landing was faked or the moon landing was faked, I'm gonna be really upset. Like, I love that. Okay. One thing I want to add before I talk about B4SD, I want to add on to Dave's thing. So when we think about international law, so first of all, don't take all the lawyers' jobs away. I got kids, man. Come on, I don't have kids. So I think first of all, there's a reason why that matters, right? There's a reason why space debris is an obligation of all of us, particularly the countries that have gone and have the access, the 5, 6 nations that have access to put things in space, is because everything above that last layer of atmosphere is what's called under international law the heritage of all mankind. It doesn't mean everyone has an equal right to it, but it means that we all have a right to that heritage. We all have a right to benefit from what comes from that. Now, that may mean equitable benefit and not equal benefit, which doesn't say, we made $1,000 in space and we divided up 193 or 4 or 6 ways, however many countries are in the UN now. You wouldn't do that. But what you would say is that whatever you're doing up there, if there's research and development, you can't go put IP on that and keep it just for your own country. Or you can't just go make a bunch of money on what you do in space and sell GPS and make that money and then clutter it up. So when we think about blowing stuff up in space and the kinetic weapons that China was testing, China essentially shot a rocket from Earth to not go and blow up anything. It didn't explode. There were no explosives. There's no bomb. It just went through a satellite. And kinetic, meaning for those physicists in the room, is literally the force of movement then colliding with something. And in this case, it made hundreds of thousands of millions of little tiny pieces of this satellite that they owned. They had a right to it. It was a Chinese missile and a Chinese satellite, and they made 1 billion pieces. They had an obligation under international law, and there was an argument about whether we actually take them to the international courts in The Hague and say, you owe the rest of the world money for having polluted. It was in Leo, I think?
Yeah.
So having polluted that orbit. And they haven't paid, obviously. So that's why I think when we start talking about space, it matters almost more than it does here, because that is somewhere that we already agree is heritage of mankind. So when we're talking about everything outside of 100 miles from your coastline and everything above the atmosphere, each one of you has a right to have that keep clean. And you can look at them and go, you dirtied up my space. That's my space. We own that as people. So I wanted to point out how important that is.
In the Tragedy Commons too. So Tragedy Commons is this thing where
Certainly.
If a business pollutes something, and pollution's a great example actually,
It's a great example.
where the business itself doesn't really feel that effect of polluting, and if it's slightly cheaper for them to do it more so, then economically they're incentivized to. And particularly with the space industry, we have this situation where it's easier just to leave the satellite there and sort of be like, throw your hands up in there and be like, there's nothing we can do. It's just going to be in orbit for the next 1,000 years, and it's not our responsibility to clean it up. And so to combat that, SpaceBridge is looking at how can we create an escrow wallet from all the transactions on our network that will be funding the removal of this debris. So specifically, identifying which of the debris should be taken down, and then putting a bounty on it, putting real money behind it, so that the company responsible for removing it benefits and is rewarded for helping something that really helps the entire space industry.
And without an autonomous and trustless system, the actors that went up and made those, you're never going to incentivize them to fix that problem. This incentivizes private operators to make money off of fixing that problem, and then go back to the governments and go, look, we just made it economically feasible for you to fix your problems. It's no longer we don't know, we mapped it out for you. Here's how you do it, here's what it's going to cost, we'll do it for you, just pay. Oh, you'd rather go buy 10 new airplanes or fighter jets or 50 new bombs or whatever, why don't you fix this instead? And I think that's where he's coming up with a solution for those of us that work with those governments. We wouldn't have been able to incentivize them otherwise. And then the very famous example of Tragedy of the Commons is a case from the 19th century where there was a British company, didn't build their smokestacks high enough, caused acid rain in Norway. So Norway sued them. What'd they do? They built a higher smokestack. They got acid rain in Finland. So we can continue to push these things back, or we can find operators that'll go fix the problem from its source, instead of just building a taller smokestack that pushes the acid rain further away from your own coast. So there's that.
I like to
No, go ahead. Go.
quick. I like to think of these new kinds of business models that are now possible as internalizing externalities. And so we're all familiar with the negative externalities of pollution, climate, deforestation, overfishing, plastics in the oceans. But then there's also positive externalities as well that we should incentivize, and that's what proof of impact is all about. Because you can putting a price on carbon is one of the most effective ways of actually doing this. We haven't been able to do that effectively because of the double spend problem and the trust problem between international countries and organizations. But now with the blockchain-based system, we can actually have methods to incorporate the true costs of an externality, positive or negative, into the cost of doing business.
And verify it.
And that's the most true form of capitalism, because if you're creating a negative externality on someone and that's not being included in the cost of goods, that's not a true capitalistic society, because it's not taking into account all the stakeholders and the values that are being interchanged.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. So the way B4SD is catalyzing that. So we do a couple of things at our organization. First, we're building a network of experts, folks that are experts in international law, sustainable development, environmental law, blockchain, technology, entrepreneurs that are just solving problems. And the reason that when Kylan started the organization and we came together as co-founders to build out the network, we both ran into the same situation. He comes from the engineering background, I come from a legal background and working in human rights, but we both would talk to people who just didn't understand the other side, right? Where folks I would talk to who were working in a carbon exchange and they're trying to incentivize carbon trading platforms in the old school, traditional way, right? That they would come to us and just go, listen, I have a really good solution for you for this. There's like a great way to make this happen. And they're going, oh, you mean like those Ponzi coins? I was like, yeah, no, not that. Getting them to understand blockchain beyond, like my dad, Bitcoin? No, Bitcoin, Dad. No, Bitcoin. So to get them to go beyond that, I had to have a conversation with them. And it was a larger conversation than just, here's what the technology does, here's the 5 fundamental features of that. It's a little heady for some folks, particularly those who are already heady in other areas. Their heads are full already, so leave them alone. Teach them in their own area. So I would walk up to someone and I would say, one of my professors, particularly a human rights professor, was working in Europe investigating atrocity crimes being committed in Syria and Iraq. And I was working with him for 6 months last year, and they were storing all this data they were pulling out of Bashar al-Assad's team, and they would get documents coming from Bashar al-Assad, or they'd download a video that ISIS put up, and they'd put it on their own servers for evidence collection, right? Chain of custody. Storing this stuff, if this guy ever ends up back in Germany, go to universal jurisdiction case in Germany, or the ICC, International Criminal Court. We want to have the evidence that proved they committed a crime. They committed an atrocity crime, they did something wrong. Here's the evidence, we have to prove it. He's got a server in his office in Europe, just a server, just one server, right? So what happens? The Russian gets the room, or a terrorist comes and blows up the building, all the evidence is gone. And the whole point of digitizing these physical documents from the Syrian army was to show there was a command structure. Bashar al-Assad ordered this general to do this at this point in time. And we mapped that out in the documents, and we put it on a computer in one place. That makes just as little sense to me as leaving it on a piece of paper does in your house, which is prone to fire, right? I don't see any difference in that. I don't see it as any more secure chain of custody model. So I would talk to him and I would say, okay, I know what you do, so let me explain blockchain to you. You take everything you have right now, and it's on 10 servers, and this is the simplest answer, right? This is the simplest example. We take all your data, you've already digitized it, you've already stored it, you create a permissioned system, no coin, no attachment, your company pays for the servers that are going to turn that over, and you use a ledger to store it in multiple places. And you can trust that that is being stored there, and it's immutable, and it can't be hacked, and it can't be deleted, and even if 2 of those centers are blown up, or EMP'd, or the Russians get them, or whatever, right, that you still have 2 others, and that data is going to be stored there. And then they're like, well, we'd have to then secure with fingerprint locks and the whole buttons and codes, all these places. I'm like, no, just put some of the data there, some of the data there, keep the algorithm that puts them all together right in your pocket, right? And he didn't really get it still, and they still haven't adopted this kind of system because no one's doing it perfectly yet to the point where they can adopt it. But after that conversation, David, my professor, looked over at me and said, but now I get it. Now I understand what blockchain is. So I think in that way, that's what B4SD started as, was a place for folks who say, I have social impact. Okay, talk about how that aligns with the standard methodology that we have under the goals. And then folks who were just scared of blockchain because they didn't understand it, being able to walk up to them and say, all right, tell me about what you do. Here's how I think it applies to you. And then they, oh, that's not so scary. So that is kind of what B4SD is here for. And we have experts within our advisory group on all sides of this. We have folks who are operating real high-level new technology, fast transaction chains. We have folks that are building smart contract systems. We have folks that are working in specific use cases. And we have folks that haven't worked in blockchain before, but that are experts in international human rights or environmental law or development or supply chain management, whatever it is, and having these folks talk to each other to understand more about who they can be and brainstorm together about what types of new projects they can develop. And in that, we do research and reporting as well to help catalyze that capacity building, right? So making sure that folks don't look at it and say, okay, great, I understand the basics of it, but now I really need an education on where the collaboration between sustainable development goals, where there is some correlation, between the goals and the project that I'm working on or the technology that I want to adopt. And that's what our research has been. And now we're moving into a little more high-level educational opportunities. One is with, and they'll be coming up in February 12 through 17, I think, is ETH Denver. It's the largest Ethereum hackathon in the world. We're helping to build out an impact track for them. So now you have the largest events focusing a small part of their resources, and they're providing, through a small amount of their resources, an opportunity for folks who solely want to have social or environmental impact come and get that training. And so some of the educational materials and the capacity building that we're doing are for conferences, hackathons, events like that, particularly focused around ETH Denver because they are the largest in the world, and ensuring that with 3,200, 3,500 developers in a room, you have a couple hundred of them working on a social impact project, you might actually get something done. You might actually find something that an organization, a government, an agency of some sort will want to attach themselves to. And I think that's a really important part of our mission. And then the fourth part of what we do at B4SD is incubating and accelerating projects specifically. We have a number of project partners that we're in a very informal way assisting them with some of the questions that they have. SpaceBridge is one, as they go forward with, help us frame the questions that we're going to have as it relates to international law, sustainable development. And we hope that in the future that becomes, once we're a little more well-funded, that becomes something that we can put more of our own financial resources and our own team resources behind, and taking 4, 5, 6 projects and saying, kind of similar to what Consensus does, which I know is one of your excellent sponsors, that they incubate projects. And I think that's where I see Kylan really wanting to go, particularly once proof of impact is complete and ready to be used by the public, that helping to build those projects in through the proof of impact system, which I'll leave that to Kylan to talk more about. It's his baby, and it's amazing. You guys really should get online and read about it. Anyways.
Yeah, so incubation and acceleration of projects has always been the goal, to drive innovation, drive social impact entrepreneurs that are kind of lost and not really understanding blockchain technology, the power behind it, just seeing it as more remittances and the tech and the cryptocurrency side. We're starting to see more entrepreneurs coming in through like remittances and supply chain projects, but really one of the main goals of Blockchain for Sustainable Development is education for those entrepreneurs and connecting them with these larger NGOs that have been working on the ground, NGOs, IGOs, World Food Bank, whatever the organization may be that has deep domain expertise in the problem they're looking to solve. So connecting the highly ambitious entrepreneurs with the technology to make it happen, and the implementation partners to actually see it through and get the leverage and the scale to make real noticeable impact is what we're going for, and that's why we've created this network of advisors, and yeah, to leverage that into an incubation acceleration model is the ultimate goal. So if you see that as one of your goals as well, please reach out to us. We actually have a meetup on
No
Tuesday.
shilling. I'm just kidding, you're fine.
This is fully educational, it's free. Actually,
It is free to join our membership network, by the way,
Yeah.
so it's okay that we shill a nonprofit, right?
yeah, and there will be food there, so we're actually
He's
losing
buying.
money on every person that comes. So. But come on by, it's in Denver.
Yeah, and just because we are a nonprofit, he's not allowed to shill. He's a company, but we're allowed to shill. Tuesday night we have our meetup. Don't let it compete with your events here in Boulder. If you're a Boulder person, stay in Boulder. Support your own events. Support your blockchain club. If any of you are from Denver, stop by. Tuesday night we'll be at Industrious. You can find more about our meetup on the denverblockchainweek.com website. Our meetup is there, or go to b4sd.org. It's all over the place. We just released a report as well on a smart irrigation system that is integrable with either traditional irrigation management and monitoring systems or blockchain-based systems. And that report will detail a little more on 6 SDGs and how a blockchain and IoT project relates to them. So if you wanted to start to get a little deeper on kind of what I'm talking about and what Kylan's been talking about, you can go to b4sd.org/resources, and you'll find some of those reporting.
Definitely check out ETH Denver.
And ETH Denver
I may be seeing John in the house.
as well.
Yeah, that'll be a great event.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys very much. We're getting a little close on time
Certainly.
constraints, but I hope you guys got me freaking excited and inspired, and it's a warming feeling to know that we have these types of people and these types of attitudes kind of building the space and setting up for hopefully really good, sustainable, and equitable foundation. We do have, I believe, a couple minutes left. If you guys are open to it, I'd like to open it up for any other questions that were raised during the panel that I didn't have a chance to get to. We can pass the microphone, or as well, if you have a loud voice, raise your hand and speak out if you'd like.
All right, go ahead and just introduce yourself, and then I'll let you ask your question.
All right, I'm Greg Fitzgerald, the CTO at Solana, and I'm a blockchain developer, and so malicious attacks are pretty much always on my mind. And I'm just kind of listening to this, thought about a way to attack the use of blockchain for sustainable development. And thinking that blockchain, especially with really low transaction fees, offers a way for to formalize informal markets. Say a informal market, somebody might trade pancakes for a haircut or something, and that's not documented anywhere. Say you brought blockchain in, and then you started documenting these things, and you can exchange your tokens for real world money. And then, so I'm thinking I can completely hack your poverty metric by bringing blockchain in and actually formalizing these markets. So now you got politicians that may have incentive to meet these sustainability goals, and they can do it by bringing in blockchain and actually potentially having a negative impact on these because they're not able to use real or traditional economic metrics. Does that make sense? What would, if that's true, like what would you guys do about that? Would you try to change the metric? How could you do that?
Right. So we've actually thought a lot about this at Flux, being this deep provenance data for environmental systems that it's a protocol, so other projects can build on top of that, like carbon markets or governments that want to track their own SDG KPIs, right? So we've tried to build that in as much as possible in the disincentivization, using game theory, using best cybersecurity, but nothing that you build is completely unhackable from a sensor perspective. So a lot of it is about attaching reputation to these types of data producers. And on the backside, actually having some kind of algorithms, we have what we call perception engines, which are just custom machine learning models that pull in various data streams that can actually pick out different outliers from the norm. So your data is only relevant and getting paid, and that's the main incentive to contribute data if it's relevant to other users and in line with basically what other users' data kind of is. So if it's an outlier, like someone trying to spoof the system, then there's the disincentive to do that because you actually are like staking your reputation on the line, as well as some tokens or whatever value that could be at stake if you get caught in this spoof. But that's a problem that each industry will have to kind of face on its own. We think we have a decent solution for environmental sensors, but it'll have to be tested for sure.
And I think
way different.
auditors and oracles is really the crux of making sure the blockchain system, whatever it is secure. If you're able to have oracles that have a reputation score and have an incentive behind always telling the correct information, and then have an audit system, whether it's an automatic algorithm trying to pick out outliers, or if it's a physical agency, nonprofit that goes to these different locations and double checks the setup to give a stamp of approval. There's really no way to get away from that second and third layer of defense against sort of maliciously trying to cheat the system. And yeah, I think that's the crux in if one oracle isn't doing it, having a protocol for then bringing in a separate oracle. So like with SpaceBridge, we have 3 different oracles we're looking at, plus onboard sensors for the satellites in order to make sure all the data matches up. But yeah, if maybe the oracle's clued, or there's, you have to make sure that it's very socially hackable proof.
Right, and designing the Oracle governance system so there is a disincentive to collude, unlike some of these faster systems, possibly EOS, that might be the incentive to collude.
All right, do you have any other questions? First.
Hello. Oh, well, sorry. Hello, so my name is Stefan. My background is I served in the Peace Corps, also got an MBA at University of Michigan. I'm really interested in this because I enjoy this whole blockchain about distributed, disruptive technology, and especially your panel because you're talking about blockchain sustainability, social impact, right? But one question that kind of arose is the metrics. Like data is super important, but also there's a lot of wisdom that needs to be used in understanding the data, right? So for example, you kind of mentioned free trade. When I was in the Peace Corps, I worked with a lot of coffee farmers, and a lot of coffee farmers, they were interested in free trade agreement because for them they didn't see any benefit really. And also from looking at it, the coffee systems, there's several kind of different layers of coffee farmers, right? You can have large corporate plantations, you have essentially landowners, and then you have a lot, like hundreds of people that come coffee picking season, come to work for them, and then you also have the smaller producers that might grow a couple bags from their personal farm. But the thing is, while free trade might grant, for example, the middle tier, like coffee landowners, more money, that doesn't really impact the workers, who are the ones, the majority of the population, where they're not going to see any benefit from that, right? So even if you kind of create a blockchain system where it kind of tracks, okay, well, yeah, this goes to this farm, kind of like, all right, this is more money is going to this farmer. Doesn't necessarily mean the whole community is going to improve from that. So I mean, that's my first question is, how do you account for that? Because a lot of times people might look at the package and say, okay, free trade blockchain certified, and not really think about it. The thing is, that's not really always going to be solving the issues. And the second thing is, how are people, especially in the developing countries, going to be afford to pay for these metrics? A lot of the farmers I work with, there's a Rainforest Alliance representative that came by and said, oh, by the way, if you do XYZ, get Rainforest Alliance certified, you'll see increased revenues from each coffee bag, right? But the thing is, there was a lot of internal resistance with the coffee farmers because the startup costs to get them certified, change the whole procedures, there was a huge risk. After investing a lot of money, they might not get enough yields, they might not get certified. That means a whole year's income is kind of gone down the drain. So there are a lot of internal resistances as well. And how would you kind of overcome that?
So I think I would say, just to reframe the questions a little bit, I can give you a very simple answer. Blockchain has no ability to help directly in that situation in any way, shape, or form. We can't change the way communities engage with each other. Blockchain is not going to natively, directly change that. Blockchain is also not going to natively or directly change what types of investment is required to make those same changes to join that certification spectrum. But in the indirect, I think technology, emerging technology, one facilitated by blockchain, but also by IoT revolution, also by Moore's law as it relates to sensor technology and how cheap we have gotten these sensors, and then take all the way that next step. Okay, you have a blockchain protocol, you have a blockchain network and a marketplace that can maybe uses a cryptocurrency on that chain specifically, or a more general currency that we know, to create a marketplace. In that marketplace, you now have reduced cost of sensors, that are talking to each other in a wireless mesh of some kind, whether it's Bluetooth or Wirepass or whatever. And those sensors are now that much cheaper because the manufacturer of them is that much cheaper. So when it comes to, at least, let's start with the second question back up towards the more important part, which is how do we incentivize better community engagement, right? Let's start from the bottom all the way down. How do you incentivize them to even build this structure, to go spend the money on this infrastructure? Well, if we're talking about a wireless mesh of humidity sensors throughout your coffee plantation. Let's take a perfect example. And we're working actually with an organization, Grameen Foundation and the Rainforest Alliance, to deal with exactly this problem. So I like that you asked it in relation to coffee and not poppy, because it's easier for me to answer, because I know this answer. Is we're talking to the coffee farmers and saying, look, yes, there are grants, yes, there are subsidies, yes, there are programs, and that's always been there for everyone, but it doesn't make it free, it doesn't make it zero cost, and there's still a risk to that farmer, particularly smallholder land farmers who are dealing with it on a much smaller scale. You would have had to run wires, broadband, interconnectivity all over your farm. You're gonna have to hire out a company to build some custom. You don't need to do that anymore, right? $20 a pop, you get 20 sensors. Now you want to space them out pretty wide, right? There are wireless mesh, including one of my companies can do it up to, if you put it on a stick and it's a little bit elevated off the ground, you can get 7 kilometers distance between each of our nodes, which means you can extend 7 times 7, you can get, I'm a lawyer, not a mathematician.
49.
Thank you, 49 kilometers between the end of your mesh network and your farmhouse. That's enough to cover nearly every small-scale landholder. And if you space them out real far, these IoT sensors, then you can say we need 20 of them for our farm at $20 a pop or $30 a pop. Now, yeah, if you get 2,000, maybe it'll be $18 a pop. But still, it's not thousands of dollars of infrastructure investment, right? It's a single smartphone, $30, right? The cheapest ones now are $30, $40, okay? And 10, 12 sensors. And that technology, maybe that license for that technology, the software that you're using, either is a blockchain protocol that because you're using it, it has its own incentive to exist and you don't need to charge them for it, or you license the technology to them, and that's where the grants come in. But it's a lot easier to say, I need $2,500 to build this out. Can we get a grant? Can we get microloans for that? That's a lot easier than traditional technological infrastructure going into that farming community and saying, we're going to build out this type of investment. Well, yeah, fine, rehabilitating the rainforest surrounding your crops is still going to cost the same amount of infrastructure development that it would before, but now you're able to prove it. You're able to validate that a lot cheaper than you used to be. I think that's one part of it. And then how does that incentivize community engagement? Well, how are you sure that the farmer is not just keeping all the money? That's the easiest way to ask that question, right? This is now a token. It's a token that exists in a marketplace. Now, instead of the traditional example is you convince a small-scale farmer to buy your irrigation system from you, and you supply that irrigation system to them, and they pay you back a percentage every year of what that advanced yield would have been. So one of the things we're working with right now with Grameen in their agriculture projects is to say, how do we quantify what benefit that smallholder farmer gained from taking that investment, taking that debt, essentially, to go take that new irrigation system. In that context, it was, I have to pay them back money, and they're giving me an infrastructure system, and they're still working within the traditional, this is money, this is fiat dollars, working within the traditional marketplaces. But when all of that is done in a tokenized manner, you now have the same token staying within that ecosystem. Now, yeah, you could break it out to fiat, of course you could, and put it back in your pocket the same way you would, but you can't force that farmer to change his human nature. You can just incentivize better actions. So in that context, we would say, you have a token, and you're being paid in this token, or you're repaying your loan on that irrigation system, or on that certification that you went and put the investment in for. That's now being done in a tokenized manner, and you're paying workers in a tokenized manner. And the entire marketplace within your village is being run digitally, in a marketplace where tokens are being traded for those services. It now feels a lot more like it used to, I have an Ignat, and there's Ignats that are recognized in our village, and if I want to take this to Turkey, I got to melt it down into a different type of gold and put a different stamp on it at the border when I get there. That system is now more local and more global. You can access global information, you can access global data, access global research. But once that is, those services are being transacted within your local community, particularly between the farmer and the workers, you now have a system that incentivizes greater adoption of services. So how would a worker then do that? They would say, don't just pay me. Let me use the data. Let me provide another service on this platform. Or let me show you based on the data that I've collected on what my input really is to your farm. So then this goes back to, like you said, the free market and saying, I'm a better employee, I'm a better worker, I've done more production for you, or I'm providing some added service, some added value level of work, right? That farmer would then, you would hope, pay more for because they want to see their own business grow. How to change human nature? Blockchain is going to change human nature. No technology is going to change human nature.
Changes incentivization, though.
It changes the incentivization. And then we still need people to go join the Peace Corps. So that's a big part of it. We're not going to eliminate your job anytime soon, I promise.
I think one thing we haven't really touched on is this change that blockchain doesn't allow that data that you produce has value in the world, and that is true for us in social media. It's also true with farmers producing data to global data co-ops that can then aggregate this massive data sets and create more insightful, more accurate insights to improve farms, improve yields. And once you have that data from a farmer, you can go and create microfinance systems that are more efficient because they can track whether you're actually using the sensors to improve your yields. And we've shown some models that even if we increase like the yield by only 10, 20%, you can easily repay any kind of initial investment in those sensors back through the microfinance loan. And it's far more efficient for the microfinance companies like Tarfin, like Grameen Bank to issue those microfinance. And you can also de-risk it from the farmer. So you can see if there's a massive drought or a flood that completely wipes out a region. Well, rather than all those farmers going in debt for the next 5 years because they obviously can't pay back that loan because their farm wasn't successful, just collateralize that risk against the entire country or an entire global network of microfinance.
And then making co-ops more trustable within themselves, right? That's where Kylan's idea then comes together, is going, okay, well, let's think 20 years ago, how did we fix that problem? We gave every employee on that land a stake in the business, right? And now there's a lot of co-op, particularly in coffee. There's a lot of co-ops that the workers are a part of that ownership structure. But then, yeah, we're still in Ghana. We're still in countries where corruption is rife, right? We're still in Colombia where, okay, so getting that money to then transfer to all those co-op owners is a little more difficult. This does fix that, right? This can eliminate, if you trust the system you're going into, that you can eliminate that at least corrupt side of it. So again, it's like you said, you can't change behavior, you can't change human nature, but you can incentivize better behavior by eliminating possibilities for cheaters of all different kinds.
All right, well, unfortunately, I think that's all we have time for right now, but I want to thank Jackson for moderating this panel and everybody on this sustainability and social impact panel. And so with this, we're going to get into the blockchain and business. We're going to give it about 5 minutes, and then we'll join back in at